This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. So President Trump was in Missouri yesterday talking about his tax plan and the importance of tax cuts, not reform cuts, saying this.
If we do this, then America will win again like never, ever before. A vote to cut taxes is a vote to put America first again. We want to do that. We want to put America first again.
Yeah, a little rally atmosphere.
In St. Charles, Missouri, right outside of St. Louis. But he also went, to remind people that this is going to boost the middle class and it's going to hurt rich people, rich people like him.
We're also going to eliminate tax breaks and complex loopholes taken advantage of by the wealthy. Who are they? I don't know. I think my accountants are going crazy right now. It's all right. Hey, look, I'm president. I don't care. I don't care anymore. I don't care.
Well, there's an interesting piece in National Review by a Reagan speechwriter. What would Reagan think of the GOP's tax bills? Oh, yeah. And Ben Elliott suggests that Reagan, probably wouldn't be supportive because the tax proposals, both in the House and the Senate, violate Reagan's three principles. Tax reductions should be dedicated to the American people. Individuals first, corporations second. Equity and fairness. Tax rates were cut for everyone. We all rise together. And thirdly, that tax cuts should, or tax policy, stop inflation from pushing people into higher tax brackets over time. Index all the brackets to the CPI, and this is, I think, more of a esoteric point. The GOP proposals index it to change CPI rises more slowly than does traditional CPI. As a result, taxpayers will move into higher brackets faster. That's the least compelling of his three arguments. But what about the other two in terms of the Republican proposals violating Reagan's first principles? For answers to that question and many others, we're pleased to be joined by our friend David French, writer at National Review, constitutional lawyer, best-selling author, and also a veteran of Operation Iraqi Freedom. And on that last point, he had a very good piece that may have gotten lost over the Thanksgiving holiday that I want to have him address. But why don't we start with tax policy? David, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
So what about former Reagan speechwriter Ben Elliott's suggestion that the Republican tax cut proposals violate the individual's first, corp second, and the equity and fairness principles that Reagan used to inform his tax policies?
It's a pretty compelling argument. I mean, the one problem I have with it is I do think that we have to address the corporate tax rate. It is too high. But I do think that a tax cut that cuts the corporate rate so much, while not cutting taxes for everybody, is problematic. So I think if you're going to cut the corporate tax rate, cut it, absolutely, but don't do it so much that you end up leaving some families behind or not giving sufficient tax breaks to families that really need it. And Rubio and Lee have an interesting proposal that says, hey, why don't we cut the tax rate for corporations slightly less, instead of from 20% to 22%, but seriously beef up the child tax credit, make it fully refundable, make it increase it, something that would really help an awful lot of families. And Trump actually said he was against that, which was surprising to me. But hopefully the Senate will pass that Rubio-Lee amendment anyway, which I think would be a big improvement on the bill.
Yeah, where do they stand on the death tax?
Well, that's going to be probably worked out in conference because the House and the Senate have different views of the death tax. So the Senate bill, in most of its permutations, has said, well, it's going to be changed, not eliminated entirely. Whereas the House wanted to get rid of it entirely. So that's going to have to be something that will be worked out. But again, that's very controversial because it's a pretty hefty tax cut as part of the overall tax cut package, but it's one that benefits really very few people.
This is a part of where some values run into conflict with one another, right? Or some
Right.
goals. The goal is growth, and so the child tax credit isn't really growth-oriented tax policy, but it is beneficial for middle-income families to put more money in their pocket to get greater relief, and so. It seems to me that in order to try and cobble together the 50 Republican senators that you need, since the Democrats are iconoclasts on the topic, is there's going to have to be some give both among senators and then the two chambers.
Right, and the Senate's working within rules that are really handcuffing it as to its options because they can't grow the budget deficit beyond a certain number without triggering a requirement to get to 60 votes to overcome a potential filibuster. So every tax cut that's in the Senate bill has to be weighed against is there a way to offer some deficit reduction as a part of the package. So the Senate can't go wild on tax cuts, not only because it's not prudent to drive the deficit up so much, but also because if they do drive it beyond a certain point, then they can't pass it with the 51 votes anymore. Then they would need to trigger, the legislative filibuster could come into play. So there's an awful lot going on here that is super complicated and kind of constrains the Republicans as they're trying to craft this policy.
So what's next? I mean, what's the next process?
Well, the Senate late last night began its debate. We're probably going to see amendments offered and a vote coming soon. If the Senate votes for tax reform, then that means we're heading into conference where you're going to try to reach an agreement between the House and the Senate and go back to both chambers again. And this could actually happen pretty quickly. It could happen very quickly if both the House and the Senate leadership get what they want. Now, it's very likely, I think, that if whatever the Senate bill is will be more like what is ultimately agreed to than what the House bill is, just for the simple fact that there's such a narrow margin in the Senate, and it's going to be really hard to go back to the Senate again with a bill that's been agreed to between the House and the Senate that would be substantially different from the one that came out of the Senate. So we'll see. I mean, the next few days are going to be really crucial.
Since you write so much on the topic of culture and the intersection with politics, or I guess the latter is embedded in the former, but got to get your comment on what's happening to news celebrities and Hollywood celebrities and politician celebrities. And do you think that we're potentially moving from a reckoning for truly bad actors into a mania where we don't distinguish among the quality of the allegations or the credibility of the accusers?
Yeah, I think that's a danger. But right now what's happening, I think, is a lot of the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, is being plucked. In other words, the people that, the people for which their misconduct was this quote-unquote open secret. So you look at it, you've seen Al Franken with pictures, you've had Matt Lauer with multiple accusers and some really lurid details, like he had a button where he could lock his door without getting up from his desk. You had the Harvey Weinstein allegations, the Conyers allegations seem quite credible. You haven't had anything yet that reminds one of the Rolling Stone controversy or the Duke lacrosse controversy, where there were these sensational allegations that turned out to be hoaxes and really turned out to be problematic within the first day or two that they were made.
What about Garrison? What about Garrison Keillor? That's not a sensational allegation, but it seems to be a rather innocent one about
touching somebody's back,
touching a woman's bare back, and seemingly, from his perspective, accidentally. And obviously, not an ideological fellow traveler of Garrison Keillor, but it seems to me that's an example of where we may be starting to inch toward the edge of the cliff.
Yeah, there's a lot of that doesn't make any sense to me. If the whole allegation is for a couple of seconds, his hand was on a back, and that's it, that would be very, very strange. But the whole thing was very strange. His explanation, followed by sort of him saying, "Well, I'm okay. I've had a long run." If it was me, and I'd lost a career that I'd worked my whole life to build, over that, I would be hopping up and down with rage.
Yeah,
hopping up and down.
Yeah.
So we just don't know. I mean, that one. If that's all there is, that would be an example of hysteria claiming somebody wrongly. I'm skeptical that that's all there is.
Well, what about the curious case of Congressman John Conyers? We had a woman come forward today on the Today Show saying that he would invite me back to his room and make unwanted advances toward me. The Black Congressional Caucus has asked him to resign. What do you think? How do you think this is going to end?
Yeah, this is going to be interesting because so far the big glaring exception to the rule that people are being held accountable finally for this misconduct is politics. So you've seen the media, you've seen Hollywood, you've seen major corporations hold people accountable for conduct, but not in politics. And part of it is the politics, with the tribalization and polarization that we have, where people don't want to give 1 inch to the other side. But part of it is the simple fact that who fires them, and so. You can ask a congressman to resign, but if he doesn't want to resign, he can't be pushed out without, a significant move by a 2/3 vote of his peers, and that's very, very difficult to do. So with Conyers, the ball's in his court now. If it is true that he's been asked to resign, that's the first positive sign of political accountability that we've seen. But you know what? He may say no. And his district is so safe that he could serve as long as he lives, I think. So we'll see what he did. We'll see what he does.
In the wake of that incredible video of the North Korean soldier defecting to South Korea, running the gauntlet, literally being shot 5 times, surviving the parasites that were in his stomach.
Yeah, a mile long or something.
Unbelievable. But it recalled the importance of freedom, and a number of op-ed writers have chimed in on, kind of watching that, and you remember how lucky you are to live in America and have the freedoms that we have. And you sort of picked up on that with a personal story over the Thanksgiving holiday of where you were 10 years ago on Thanksgiving, and that was deployed to Iraq, and just recounting your story a little bit and why you decided to share it.
Yeah. This Thanksgiving was very significant for our family because it was exactly 10 years ago last Thanksgiving that I was flying into Iraq to begin my deployment with the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment in Diyala Province as part of the surge. And I was kind of an older guy doing it. I had decided to join later in life because I just had the conviction that I couldn't keep supporting a war that I wasn't willing to fight myself. So I joined, volunteered to go to Iraq, and 10 years ago on Thanksgiving, I was flying in to begin my deployment. And at that time, I didn't know it, but at that very moment that I was flying into Iraq, my youngest daughter was being born. We adopted our youngest daughter. She's from Ethiopia, and so it's such a significant day in our family that that day was November 22nd, which was Thanksgiving Eve this year, Thanksgiving that year. That was a moment when my life changed forever, when our family's life changed forever in ways we didn't really know at that time, because it wasn't until after I got back from Iraq that we even began the adoption process. And then, of course, my daughter's life began. And so I just took some time in National Review to reflect on that and what that meant, and how profoundly that all of those events had changed our family.
It's an excellent piece worth checking out. I tweeted it at Dan Proft, but you can go to nationalreview.com and check it out, too. Thanksgiving 10 years ago by David French, writer at National Review, constitutional lawyer, author, and veteran of Operation Iraqi Freedom, as he was just describing. David, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.